Welcome in to another week of Surviving Paradise. Thanks for joining me on this week's podcast. I am the host, Stacy Bauman, and this is the podcast where we take a deep dive look at Jehovah's Witnesses. We do it with a little bit of humor, a whole bunch of sarcasm, and some real life experience. So once again, as I start almost every episode, I want to thank everyone who has been tuning in and listening to the podcast and all those fantastic people that have actually been taking the time to comment on YouTube or on Spotify, Apple iTunes, and all the places where this little passion project has taken off and has landed. And I really want to take a minute once again to say what a week for Jehovah's Witnesses. At the time of this recording, the Pursue Peace District conventions are landing all over the planet. And there is, as usual, there is no lack of mind-blowing material coming out of the district convention, particularly since they've changed so much from the time when I was a kid and I was actually speaking and involved at district conventions. It's almost unrecognizable. The conventions now are almost completely run by the governing body, as they are each featured, their bios blown up on big screens, and their opinions are flying. As you might imagine, it's now off the page and into the digital world, the video world. And I'll tell you, we talked a little bit last week about Stephen Lett's comments about babies now being the enemies of Jehovah God, because they're just born that way, folks. But there's even more stuff, and some of it is just absolutely unnerving, pisses me off. There's some stuff directed very clearly at teenagers in high school that are dealing with all the social repercussions and all the awkwardness that comes with being a Jehovah's Witness in a high school environment. And God, they're terrible. They're just absolutely terrible. We even have a drama. If you haven't seen this yet, I invite you to go find someone who has put that up, where the mother or wife in a step-parent family isn't allowed to speak during the family Bible study. She does so, and it leads to a whole drama on how women should know their place, despite the fact that this single mother was raising her teenagers prior to marrying this brother. But now, he tries to delicately navigate telling her that, I'm the man here. I should really be doing all the teaching, and your endless correcting of me is not going to fly. It's mind-blowing. Honestly, these district conventions and these dramas now over the past, I guess it would be close to 5 years, probably more, I'm a bad judge of time, have become so comical, so bad. And some of this stuff has always been bad. When I grew up in Jehovah's Witnesses, it was the demonstrations on stage. It was the unrealistic parts about how to handle a crisis at school or in the family. Now they devote thousands and thousands of dollars, unbelievable amounts of man hours to producing these god-awful snapshots on video of how these people should run their family. Unrealistic, intellectually insulting, ineffective, and once again, as you might expect from the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, the 8 guys in upstate New York, they go overtime to take pot shots at women and to tell teenagers that almost everything they do, say, or feel is wrong. There's even a segment now where one of the teenage girls ends up throwing away her jeans because they have rips in it, and she's counseled, and her mother exudes confidence that she'll do the right thing. She ends up throwing away jeans because they have tears in the jean. It's truly mind-boggling that there's such a lack of self-awareness from these men, such a lack of self-awareness to not even realize that they're losing teenagers at a historic rate. They're losing people in their 20s at a historic rate, especially in developed countries. But here it is again. Another year. You might remember a few years ago, if you haven't seen the bunker videos, I think there's more coming in this convention. I haven't had a chance to watch all of it, where the world is against Jehovah's Witnesses and we're all in hiding. A few years ago, it was in the basement. There was a secret door knock. It was a take on Noah's Ark, and during the Great Tribulation, one brother decided not to come, and they all showed their sadness over it. He didn't have the secret door knock to get into the bunker. It's just truly mind-blowing how the further you get away, at least for this guy, it becomes almost unrecognizable, despite the fact that I was drowning as a Jehovah's Witness elder in the culture, the rules, and the insanity during my time there. So if you haven't seen those, go take a look at it. If for no other reason, they're so entertaining, they're so mind-numbingly bad that I had lots of laugh out loud moments. And then, of course, as is the case with me personally, I tend to get upset and angry because I'm watching teenagers and kids being subjected to this crap from the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. So starting there, it has been a long week, and I'm sure for those that are PMOs, it is really, really difficult time of year as they are subjected to the absolute nuttiness and insulting teachings of another round of the district convention. So take a peek at that. This week, and I guess inspired by some of that ridiculous stuff, I wanted to cover a couple of things that go way back to my childhood. And I hope I'm not alone. I can't imagine I am. I see some of the great people who regularly comment, especially on YouTube and in the DMs. I just wanted to tackle some of these subjects. You've heard me use the term in past episodes, Christianity a la carte, or Jehovah's Witnesses a la carte. I've used that phrase many times, and it's a phrase that I developed even when I was one of Jehovah's Witnesses and was a servant and an elder, especially because in all honesty, I was a studier. I actually read the literature. I actually jumped into this, even though never close to the degree I did when it was time to leave. Nonetheless, it didn't take much for someone who's a thinking or a logical thinker or just anybody who has a desire to learn, excuse me, to see that some of these subjects I'm going to bring up this week are so comically bad, so illogical, and so mistaught that it just didn't take much for me, even during that time period when I was dyed-in-the-wool Jehovah's Witness, to really be scratching my head wondering, what am I reading? What am I listening to? What is it I claim I believe? And I wanted to tackle 2 or 3 of these subjects right now. And it is always the case for those that have listened along. It almost always drops into that bucket we call hypocrisy. There's a lot of words you could throw at Jehovah's Witnesses: insane, crazy, manipulative. But at the end of the day, it's just crazy, crazy hypocrisy. As I've stated more than once on this podcast, the vast majority of Jehovah's Witnesses don't study, don't read their own material, don't read their own publications. And I can't even tell you, I would say the majority of people I grew up with and was associated with, including elders, had never even read the Bible front to back. So I'm now going to unveil 2 to 3 subjects, depending on time here this week, that always left me thinking, what the hell are we doing? And here's 3 of them. And throughout the course of time, it always causes a different range of emotions, right, when you land on these things. And we've seen the organization as a whole go into overdrive to hide a lot of their past books, their past magazines. You can't get them all. They've mothballed them. Some of those that we've studied that we were told were life and death material are now completely gone off the shelves of kingdom halls and unavailable to the common person. So lucky for some of us, we still have some of those hard copies in print. And I am now going to share with you 3 things from the delightful teachings of the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, the 8 guys in upstate New York who were handpicked by Jesus Christ himself in 1919. Of course, the names and faces have changed, but the level of stupidity has only grown. So here we go. Subject 1. there's some history here. I had debates with several other servants and other people on this subject. And even now, as I I bring it up here on the podcast, I just shake my head. It just brings back so many memories of conversations, particularly with elders, some of whom were well read or well studied, so many of them not. So those were empty, vapid conversations. But with the other guys who studied, these conversations would often go on for hours. So consider this subject, and maybe you've considered it for the long timers or the people who were raised Jehovah's Witnesses. Maybe you considered this. I want to talk, and warning alert, there's going to be a lot of sarcasm here. It is not meant to be disrespectful. It is not meant to hurt feelings. It is not meant to be nasty. It's sarcasm. I want to talk about fat people. And the person saying that right now, who just had a visit to his doctor, has been told he is 25 pounds overweight, that I need to lose weight. So guess what? I am being self-deprecating and pointing the finger. I want to talk about fat people, overweight people, and the Jehovah's Witness teaching on gluttony. Now, why do I use those terms? Because it's kind of stupid, because it's somewhat amusing, and I'm trying to make a point. Jehovah's Witnesses and the governing body have there's two subjects that they have a very mixed bucket of commentary, non-commentary on. Actually, I could think of three. One of them I'm going to get out of the way because it's salacious. It's oral sex. We'll have a whole episode on that. But there's a couple of other ones. The other one we're not going to discuss in this episode is slander or libel. Very mixed reviews on what we do about that. The third one is this subject: gluttony, being overweight, fat people, acting like a fat person. Now, I want to start out by telling you that one of the last things Jehovah's Witnesses have covered on this subject of gluttony comes to us from as recent as 2004, a question from the readers on how does the Christian congregation view gluttony. I am going to spare you going into the Bible. I'm sure you recognize many of the books, the chapters and the verses, Proverbs 23, 20, and 21, where it talks about gluttons and drunkards and how bad and terrible they are. Deuteronomy 21:20, where we actually see that according to the Mosaic law, there was given an example of a man who was a glutton, overate, was fat, and he also overdrank, and how they were to put him to death for that in the Mosaic law. There are other things from the book of Judges with King Eglon, where it talks about the Jehud's sword going in over his fat. He was so fat that the fat went over the blade of the sword. Nonetheless, the Bible does not speak well of gluttony, which doesn't necessarily always point towards being fat or overweight. What it does, and as Jehovah's Witnesses go out of the way to teach you, is that gluttony can more often than not be an attitude. It's someone who's greedy. They use scriptures like 1 Corinthians 6, 9 through 10, Philippians 3, 18 and 19, 1 Corinthians 5, 11 through 13, all talking about this attitude of greed. And gluttony is condemned. And for those listening along, in the Elders, the Shepherd the Flock of God book, gluttony is actually a disfellowshipping offense. Being someone who's a notorious overeater. And of course, gluttony tends to almost always be mentioned with overdrinking as well. So a drunkard. Gluttons and drunkards are condemned to death if they are unrepentant at Armageddon. For Jehovah's Witnesses in the congregation, gluttony, overeating, being greedy about food or greedy about drink is a judicial committee matter. It is listed in the Shepherd the Flock of God book. Here is the problem. despite often being mere letters, mere words, and almost always included, I should say, away from drunkenness. They're almost like a tag team, gluttony and drunkenness, drunkards. Despite them being listed right next to each other, one is going to get you a judicial committee and into the back room rapidly and all the talk of the congregation. The other, it's pretty much ignored. It's so ignored that a Jehovah's Witness elder can be pushing 3 bills, 300 pounds. And again, I want to note, I'm not trying to make fun of people. I myself am overweight. I'm simply stating the facts about what happens as you get older and you put on weight, even if you're not trying to. But in this case, a Christian man, a Christian member of Jehovah's Witnesses can be appointed as an elder being morbidly obese. Morbidly obese. Now, if everyone knew he was getting drunk, would that be the case? Like he'd gone to a couple parties, got hammered, and fell down at the Jehovah's Witness picnic get together? No, you're going to have a problem. But mere letters away is its pal, its twin, gluttony, greed, overeating. And everybody ignores it. If you don't think this is the case, I invite you to take a look at today's governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. Almost all of those men, and again, I'm throwing myself under the bus here, are overweight. They're overweight. And we don't have time to go into Tony Morris being caught buying a shopping cart full of liquor on a Sunday morning, right? That's subject for another time. But they're overweight. They overeat. They don't take care of themselves. In my own personal experience as a Jehovah's Witness and as an elder, I can tell you that as a teenage kid, somebody who got in trouble a few times and had his own share of judicial meetings as just a mere baptized publisher as a teenager, as a young guy, there was more than once I walked out of there thinking, wait a minute, I'm getting in trouble, or that kid over there is getting in trouble for touching a cigarette or smoking a cigar or touching a girl's breasts. But we're being counseled by 3 guys who can't button the top button on their pants. They're so overweight. They're so obese. And at that point, after you're baptized, you tend to have a pretty good idea that the Bible condemns gluttony, obesity, an attitude where you just can't get enough food. Now, if you think, well, okay, Stacy, come on, you're splitting hairs here. I understand that. I understand. However, if you've ever been to a Jehovah's Witness get together and you've seen Jehovah's Witnesses and how some of them eat, I can assure you there is a problem. There's a problem. I'm not even making light of it because let's be honest, this is a serious health issue. It really is. Obesity and overeating and just craving food is usually a sign of something else going on, depression, psychological issues, something else. Nonetheless, it fascinated me as a teenager particularly that we can read a verse of the Bible that condemns gluttony and drunkenness and do absolutely everything in our power to discipline the drunkard and absolutely everything in our power to turn away and not even remotely address the fact that this person overeats to an extreme and is morbidly obese. In fact, we'll even set that person up as an example or an elder or a pioneer. But get this. I want to read for you how seriously in the past Jehovah's Witnesses and the governing body and elders have taken this issue of overeating and being a glutton. This first quote comes from the Watchtower of 1974, page 167. Quote, "Glutton fails to show love for Jehovah. Is food a big thing in his life? If, in the presence of others, does he selfishly ignore their needs and take more than his fair share? Is he grossly overweight, but shows no restraint over food, habitually gorging himself? Does he feel uncomfortable, perhaps even getting sick because of eating too much? He has no place in the congregation of God's people. He will not inherit God's kingdom. End quote. Now, a couple of observations here. Last time I checked, food was a big thing in everyone's life. As I read this quote, I couldn't help but think that some poor Bethelite on the writing committee got stiffed at the breakfast table and was mad about it. And that's where this came from. They had an axe to grind. Nothing incurs God's wrath like taking the last piece of bacon. The second observation is, I love how they very carefully stay away from upsetting the sisters by saying he. There's nothing more offensive than asking a woman her age or her weight. So I thought that was very interesting that they did everything in their power to stay away from that in 1974. But they weren't done. The Watchtower of December 15th, 1978, page 9. Quote, at a meal, the gluttonous person may make it impossible for other diners to eat to satisfaction. For this reason, the glutton may even be despised. He actually isolates himself from others. They may shun him. He may incur God's displeasure and lose his life. In the near future, God's kingdom through Jesus Christ will bring law-defying gluttons to an end. Then persons will hunger no more. End quote. I'm very sorry. This subject makes me laugh. I'm being very vulnerable and open about this. December 15th, 1978. I mean, praise Jah. No more hunger. He's got a plan for all the famine-stricken lands. He's going to kill the fat people or the people that eat too much. I mean, this is a quote from the governing body who claim, of course, that Jesus gave them this information. So if you're going for seconds, you better think again. Don't you dare let anyone see you undo that top button on your pants. That could be a reason to be despised or shunned or lose your life. They literally have a green light to shun someone who's fat, requiring, I guess, for you to invest in Weight Watchers to demonstrate your true repentance. I don't know. But here's the thing. Jehovah is apparently going to inspire that judicial committee to make sure you agree to an all-vegetable diet, a plant diet, and a treadmill. I don't know. They're just going to keep shunning you. I'm being sarcastic. This is unbelievable. This is unbelievable. And yet, if we're being honest, it's right there in the Bible. It is right there. I mean, can you even begin to imagine? And before I even say this, I want to tell you this has happened. This has been a judicial matter. This has been a judicial matter. I know of actual real experiences where an overweight person, someone who might be morbidly obese, and went to town at the JW barbecue on Saturday afternoon, went in and was counseled on this subject matter. And I guess by all intents and purposes, it's there in the Bible. If they were over drinking, they'd be counseled. And so there have been people who've been counseled about this. But can you imagine a sister at a judicial committee with 3 guys staring at her? Now tell us about your dress size. Have you dropped a couple sizes? Sister, there's reports that you've been wearing Spanx to the Kingdom Hall. We need to talk counsel here. I mean, I'm making light of this, and I hope I'm not offending anyone, but it just needs to be said, in my opinion. Where in the world does this begin and end? And aside from the absurdity, aside from the incredible humor in these inspirations, again, from the governing body, the true irony in these harsh words and in the Bible's words on gluttony, the true irony lies in one thing. Many Jehovah's Witnesses are overweight. They're overweight. Oddly enough, the Bible makes no comments on things such as smoking, but it does, as we've seen through many scriptures, it openly warns against overeating and overdrinking. But if you go to a Jehovah's Witness event, a social event, a dinner, a baby shower, a picnic, a get together, we used to call them in the 70s and 80s, prepare to see yourself amongst a crowd of, quite candidly, a lot of overweight people overindulging. We've talked, and we'll need a whole episode to talk about alcohol, because to me, it's the number one problem among Jehovah's Witnesses. But overeating is right next to it, just like it is in the Bible. And to get serious for a minute, we know that this is to cover over other problems, other pain, other trauma, other lack of self-esteem, other oftentimes terrible things that have happened to someone, that food can become just as addictive as drugs and alcohol. But the irony for me as a teenager was I couldn't coalesce how you could get on me about drinking as a teenager or smoking a cigar as a teenager. The cigar thing, I guess, more than anything. And the guy counseling me was, 100 pounds overweight. And if you knew the Bible and if you knew the scriptures, you're wondering, it doesn't make any sense. It's not unlike what we see in the Mosaic Law with tattoos, where they point to a random scripture that talks about not doing markings on your skin and ignore the verse right before it that says, don't shave your beard. This is right there in that neighborhood of what? And therefore my phrase, Christianity a la carte. We pick one thing, we throw the other thing out. We apply one thing, we throw the other thing out. We discipline for one thing and change someone's life dramatically. The other one, we don't even worry about. I can't counsel them because guess what? I'm also about 60 pounds overweight and I eat all day long. It's really incredible. And I'll tell you, you may wonder, well, how do they get around this? I'll tell you what, this comes from the November 1st, 2004 question from the readers that I mentioned at the outset. And you can see what they so easily try to soft sell here in 3 or 4 paragraphs into the article after discussing how awful gluttony and overeating is. It makes this comment, quote, although God's word places a drunkard on the same level as a glutton, the former is much easier to identify than the latter. The signs of drunkenness are usually quite visible. However, determining the point at which an individual becomes a confirmed glutton is much harder because it cannot be determined simply by outward appearance. Therefore, handling situations in this area of concern requires great care and discernment on the part of the elders in the congregation. End quote. Never mind the absurdity of that. Can you see when someone's drunk and when they're falling down all over the place and they're slurring their words and they're super happy drunk? Of course you could see that. But the assertion that the signs of drunkenness are quite visible, as it says, however, determining the point of which an individual becomes a confirmed glutton is much harder. You can't determine it simply by outward appearance. Folks, you can usually tell that someone is overeating quite easily by the way they look. Okay? I've made some funnies. I've been sarcastic. I'm poking fun even at myself. But you can tell that someone's got a belly and that they overeat or they're taking in too many calories quite easily. The difference is they're just not going to do anything about it. Nothing. Christianity a la carte. I served as an elder for 11 years. I had so many judicial meetings, I can't even remember. The majority of the men that I served with as shepherds of God's flock were very overweight. Several of them were morbidly obese. Even worse, not only were they infamous for being large, but they were infamous for over drinking. Their wives were notorious for over drinking. One glass of wine leads to one bottle of wine, leads to 2 bottles of wine, leads to 10. And that's in one night. I've seen sisters come to me personally and say they were grossly offended and stumbled at a baby shower because the elders' wives were feeding their faces and getting drunk, and they don't understand when the scripture so outwardly says that that is condemned. And as we have stated from the inspired word of the governing body, they are to be despised, they are even to be shunned, and they are to possibly lose their life for this kind of conduct. Nonetheless, that inspired counsel never comes into play. None of those Watchtower quotes are ever read. It's very rare, although I did state that there have been meetings on this. There's usually something else behind that. There's usually something else. But the real rub to me personally came when, as a baptized young guy or dealing with other baptized young people, doing something like smoking a couple puffs on a cigarette after school, or wanting to play school sports, or voting at the school council and wanting to be class president. That gets you a trip to the B school. Not mentioned in the Bible. No word on it. Zero, zippo, zilcho. However, you've got the guys taking you to the B school are 120 pounds overweight. They literally are heavy breathers. We had one brother who had to lean against things because he was so heavy he could fall over, and his health was so terrible, so terrible. But that's never, ever, ever going to be talked about, and it's never going to be dealt with. And it's one of those things that Jehovah's Witnesses, particularly elders, just very conveniently look the other way, mostly because they themselves are dealing with being very overweight and overeating. Nonetheless, the teenager is going to get hauled into the B school for watching an R-rated movie, not mentioned in the Bible, and brother Top Button Popped is going to give him counsel, despite the fact that he doesn't openly follow the counsel of something that is mentioned in the Bible. Christianity a la carte. You're never going to get this one answered. I had several debates with elders about why we don't do anything about it. Oftentimes those that weren't quite as overweight, but it's absolutely comical to a thinking person that there can be so many Jehovah's Witnesses who overeat and overdrink, and gluttony is clearly in play, even by those serving, and literally nothing's done. It's not even a conversation. So I poke fun at it because it's one of those subjects we laugh at. There's jokes in our society in the Western world. I myself am overweight to a degree, and we poke fun at it. But on the other end, it's not that funny, right? It's a dichotomy, because not only is someone harming their health, which I do think is very important to address, but it shows the gross hypocrisy of Jehovah's Witnesses, and particularly on this subject of overeating. So one of a couple Christianity a la cartes I wanted to unpack this week on the podcast. Would love to hear your comments if you ever experienced any counsel for this. If you wondered why no counsel's ever given on this, I would love to hear, because it's one of those things that oftentimes a couple of myself, I can think of one elder in particular, we would sit around for an hour debating this. I actually had a ministerial servant come to me once when I was an elder and want to talk about this after a get together. And the truth of the matter is, we just turn a blind eye. That's the truth of the matter. We just don't discuss it. We just don't. And it really, really, really is truly comical when you think about it. Okay, let's talk about a second one this week. We got time for one more Jehovah's Witness Christianity a la carte, courtesy of my crazy brain growing up and my experiences as a Jehovah's Witness. So, as many of you know, and it's probably the badge that so many Jehovah's Witnesses wear, Jehovah's Witnesses are not allowed to have anything to do with a birthday party. Birthday parties are evil. So are holidays. Witness kids are taught at a young age that any mention of a birthday party while at school, and they are literally, at least in the 70s and 80s, one of the councils, and there was parts on the stage, and our parents taught us this. We were asked to be excused to the library. We were going to take part in little Johnny or Susie's birthday party. And there has actually been a Caleb and Sophia video for kids on this about a birthday cupcake. It is so absurd. Please go watch it if you haven't seen it. But birthdays are seen in the Jehovah's Witness world as evil. And kids are not to touch any elements of the birthday. They're not to sing. They're not to give gifts. Or, oh my God, you're certainly not allowed to eat a piece of cake, even after the birthday party is over and someone left you a piece of cake to just take home. I know you don't participate, but I think you're my friend in third grade, and I left you a piece of cake. I'm sorry, I can't even touch that. It is polluted by the demonic teachings of Satan. This is all true. And I think that I'm probably not doing justice to this a la carte, this subject, because this is probably worthy of a whole hour. In fact, it will be. We'll do it again. But as one might imagine, being left out, singled out, and being someone who simply can't go to a birthday party is incredibly damaging and humiliating to a child. It results in embarrassment, and it doesn't matter. It's not just young kids. It's kids in high school. It's older kids. But it doesn't stop there. A Jehovah's Witness that is caught celebrating a birthday or recognizing their child by privately doing something special on their birthday, or anyone for that matter, as special on their day of birth, can be disfellowshipped. You can be shunned from the congregation and labeled as someone doomed to a fireball, dead meat at Armageddon, because you told your child, happy birthday. It's the best, most important day of my entire life. Nope. You too could be doomed at Armageddon for celebrating a birthday. Now, this only becomes funny when you ask a Jehovah's Witness, oftentimes baptized for decades, and out claiming they can help you learn the Bible, why they don't celebrate birthdays. And you find that they have absolutely no idea why. You would think you would be able to walk up to any one of an estimated 8 million Jehovah's Witnesses and say, show me from the Bible why I should not be celebrating a birthday and why I shouldn't even talk about it. I shouldn't consider it. I shouldn't attend it. I shouldn't sing. Show me. Birthdays are the perfect subject to study if you want to see how the faithful and discreet slave, that's right, the governing body, come up with their doctrines and beliefs. Birthdays. It's a great place to start. Now, for those that can actually answer the question as to why Jehovah's Witnesses can't celebrate birthdays, they usually reply with one of the following. It's almost, and I mean 99.999%. Here's the canned answers. It's one of these two. Number one, the only birthdays mentioned in the Bible had bad endings. Number two, birthdays are pagan. So let's unpack these. Let's unpack these Jehovah's Witness style. As I mentioned, almost no Jehovah's Witness can explain to you why they don't do it. And I'm talking grown adults can't explain it. They'll hit you with one of those two things. And birthdays are the perfect snapshot of how the governing body, the 8 guys in upstate New York, come up with their quote unquote doctrines for Jehovah's Witnesses. I share with you the Watchtower of July 15th, 1980, pages 30 through 31. Quote, the Bible reports only 2 birthday celebrations, both persons who were not servants of the true God. The first was that of Pharaoh of Egypt. It was marked by the hanging of Pharaoh's baker, who had been in prison with Joseph. The second, some 1800 years later, was the birthday of Herod Antipas, during which the daughter of Herodias asked for the head of John the Baptizer. Is it just coincidental that they are mentioned and that both were for persons not having God's approval? Or could it be that Jehovah deliberately had these details recorded in his word, which he says is beneficial for teaching, for reproving, and for setting things straight? End quote. That quote from 1980 is plastered across millions of pages for Jehovah's Witness to access via the library, now via the website, jw.org, as to how to reason with people on why they don't do birthdays. 2 accounts in the Bible of people at birthday parties. Neither of the people's birthday were Jews, essentially. They weren't Jews, because that's who Jehovah's people were in the Bible, all the way up till the end. And bad things happen at the birthday party. So they reason, as I said, quote, could it be that Jehovah deliberately had these details recorded? Never dawns on them to think, could it be that Jehovah, who never mentions birthdays, or Jesus, who never mentions birthdays, could have deliberately stated, thou shalt not celebrate birthdays? Never done, never said. Just 2 stories that happen to be birthday parties. It's an excellent example of how the governing body comes up with a doctrine that is not condemned nor commented on by God or the Bible. Neither of these events were featured in the Bible as a warning against birthday parties. We don't find God or Jesus or anyone else saying don't celebrate your birthday. They were historical accounts of bad things happening that happen to be at birthday parties. And so you ask yourself, as it states in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 6, they just said the Bible is inspired and beneficial for all things. 1 Corinthians 4, 6 asks, or commands rather, that you never go beyond the things written. It's condemned. The Bible does not say don't celebrate birthdays. It shares a couple of stories that happen to have been of birthdays, and that I'll get into here in a minute. But this is the kind of reasoning that these guys sit around a big table and come up with and claim that Jesus gave it to them. As a comparison, as an analogy, bad things happen in automobiles too. Should you stop driving them? They're condemned, right? You can burn your hand on a stove. Should you stop cooking on a stove? It's this kind of specious reasoning, this silliness, that has altered the lives of millions of people. The Bible actually mentions dogs, I believe, over 40 times in the Bible. Dogs. Did you know that not one account, not one mentions a dog in a positive light? Do Jehovah's Witnesses have dogs? It's hypocrisy. It's Christianity a la carte. But then just taking these 2 examples, the example of Joseph as a man of faith validated, the whole story was a tool to validate that he walked with Jehovah God and he had the power to prophesy. Had nothing to do with a birthday party, other than that's happened to be where it happened. It was after this party where this guy was hung because he couldn't prophesy correctly to the Pharaoh that Joseph was moved into a power position in Egypt. Whether this is a real story, subject for another day. As for John the Baptist, he was a key component in the early formation of the Christian church, of the Christian congregation, of Christianity. The party he wasn't even at had nothing to do with the overall conclusion. The story merely featured power-hungry people that sought revenge. It was not a story placed in the Bible to condemn birthday parties. It's so dishonest and so disingenuous to reach that conclusion. And I gave some examples. Fire is warm and can keep us warm when we're freezing, but it can also burn you. Should we stop using fire? Bad things could happen at a birthday party. Should we stop celebrating birthdays? Dogs, evil animals in every single mention in the Bible, but we still have dogs. This is a perfect snapshot of how Jehovah's Witnesses and the governing body have come up with countless doctrines. I'm picking 2 this week to talk about. So let's move on to the second claim when it comes to birthday parties. The governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses has pummeled the average witness from the time they're a child with how pagan birthday parties are. That they're pagan, they're part of false religion, they are not from Jehovah, they are something that is so awful and so foreign to Christianity that you should not even think about it. You shouldn't go to one. It's condemned. You can be disfellowshipped for attending or throwing a birthday party. Let that sink in. Why? Because again, it's pagan. It's pagan. I honestly challenge anyone listening to go up and ask a Jehovah's Witness why they don't celebrate birthday parties. You're going to get one of those 2. That, well, the only 2 in the Bible, bad things happened, or it's pagan. So again, sticking for a moment to the second response you're going to get, that it's pagan. Nothing is more bizarre and grossly hypocritical than the fact that while the Watchtower condemns birthdays based on pagan roots, they allow and encourage other pagan practices as perfectly normal and as actually having God's blessing. Birthdays are pagan and evil. All these other pagan things are okay, and Jehovah smiles with delight. Here's one, and if you haven't been able to tell by now, it's one of my favorites and a pet peeve. Shaving. Shaving your face. People who shaved their face in the Bible were all pagan. The Egyptians. Shaving your face is openly a pagan practice by the Bible standards. Jews, people that were loyal to Jehovah, were commanded not to touch the hair on their face. Jesus himself had a beard. Everyone, even their own illustrations in literature, show Jehovah's people with beards. But as a Jehovah's Witness, you are required as a man to shave your face. And they often use facial hair as a distinctive mark of someone who's bad, evil, or worldly in all of their photographs. And yet shaving your face is a practice that started with pagan civilizations. The Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans. It's unbelievable. But with Jehovah's Witnesses, it's a requirement. And that pagan belief is blessed. Don't eat a birthday cake. Shave your face. Young kids think this stuff. I did. Thinkers will think about this. Let's look at another one. The calendar. We use the calendar for everything. It's in our Outlook. It's in our email. It's hanging on the walls. It's hanging in the Jehovah's Witness calendar. They remember the calendars that they pump out that you get once a year with a daily text on it that you put to your wall? Pagan. Each month is named after a god or a Roman emperor. The calendar's pagan. Why are we using it? Here's one that will amuse you and will absolutely send you scrambling if you've got access to old stuff. Believe it or not, Jehovah's Witnesses and the governing body didn't exist till the 70s. The guys in charge actually tried to create their own calendar. You can actually see it, complete with new monthly names in all their glory. It's in the very valuable 1935 Yearbook of Jehovah's Witnesses. Their self-made calendar, recognizing that every month was a pagan month, named after pagan gods and Roman emperors. So they made an effort, took a swing and a miss at creating a new calendar to be used by their people. That one just died. Didn't get off the ground, but you can see it. It's in the 1935 yearbook. If you would have any access to that, it's mind-blowing. But again, don't blow out a candle. That's pagan. The calendar, something you use every day, is okay. We could take it a step further and say days of the week. All pagan gods. All of them. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. All of them off the names of pagan gods, but they still use them. Here's one that will strike a chord or hit a nerve for the sisters, the women. Eye makeup. Eye makeup was used by pagans and it was thought to ward off evil spirits. You never saw a Jew or a Christian with a really nice mascara. It didn't happen. And in fact, you can actually see that they know this in the Bible Stories book when you look at the illustration of Jezebel, all made up with makeup and lipstick and all this stuff. Eye makeup and makeup, cosmetics, for lack of a better term, they didn't call it that, was all pagan. You can see it with the Egyptians, the way they do their eyes. It's stunning. But you mean to tell me that Jehovah's Witness women aren't wearing makeup? Huh? It's a pagan practice. It's incredibly easy to trace. There's probably, in some cases, we're glad that that's okay, that Jehovah suddenly blesses makeup. But it was a pagan practice. Lipstick, which I mentioned, lipstick in particular was pagan. Prostitutes used lipstick to indicate that they were open to performing oral sex. This is all very easy history. And yet you could see sisters, especially in any Western kingdom hall or congregation, wearing lots of lipstick. But trust me, they're not having oral sex. That's a subject for another day. Whole nother subject. Need I bring up circumcision? It was used long before the Jews claimed it. Long before the Jews claimed it. It actually had its roots in snake worship in ancient Egypt. This is all stone cold, rock solid history. All of these are pagan. Jehovah's Witnesses do all of them, but they can't say happy birthday to someone. You're risking being shunned. And these are just but a few examples of pagan practices that witnesses practice, recognize, as you've seen on a daily basis. But my personal favorite is one that I want to tackle as we conclude, and that is this whole issue, and I'm sure if you've been a witness for a long time, you know where this is going, the whole issue surrounding weddings or marriage. While they are busy making kids feel terrible for having a cupcake at school or buying a birthday present for someone, while they're busy vehemently condemning birthdays, they have no problem whatsoever participating in openly pagan practices in their weddings. I want you to consider a few examples of wedding elements of a wedding that are all present in a Jehovah's Witness ceremony. They happen right inside the Kingdom Hall. They all recognize this. They take part in it. And they take part in it all under the umbrella of Jehovah's blessing, all with the blessing of Jesus, all with the blessing of the governing body. These pagan practices, they've decided are okay. If you sing happy birthday, you're in the B school. Here's the obvious one: wedding rings. Folks, wedding rings, it's such easy history. Wedding rings are incredibly pagan. They're a pagan symbol. I won't go ad nauseum into the history of them, but it's pagan. The wedding ring is pagan, and yet almost every Jehovah's Witness is wearing a wedding ring if they're married. Almost everyone. It's a big deal. I mean, the sisters like showing those off, these beautiful rings that they got. They lassoed a man, and they really want to show off that beautiful wedding ring, and it's pagan. It's as pagan as a Christmas tree. It's as pagan as a birthday cake. It's as pagan as happy birthday, but it's okay in this case. A wedding dress, pagan. Speaks to the virginal qualities of the bride. It has all pagan roots. The bridal veil, pagan. It's used to ward off evil spirits, going all the way back to the dawn of man. The flowers, the bouquet, was originally created and carried to ward off evil spirits from the bride. Tossing the bouquet is the opportunity for the guest to get a piece of the lucky bride. Good luck, good fortune. Bridesmaids, similar dresses, all designed to confuse the evil spirits away from the bride and onto the bridesmaids. Wedding cake, cutting it, feeding it to each other, and saving the top layer, all pagan practices. And you will see almost all of these elements at a Jehovah's Witness wedding. You will see almost all of them being done with Jehovah's blessing, being done with an elder giving the talk, with the governing body saying this is okay, all of these pagan symbols, all of these pagan designed practices, all of these things are perfectly okay. But if you go to a birthday party, it's time for a judicial committee. If you wish your child happy birthday, it's time for a judicial committee. You'll see all of this. But to be honest, just cutting to the chase in what has been a rambling episode, thank you if you're still listening. I've always compared the bizarre obedience to everything anti-birthday to the Bible's open condemnation of getting drunk. And trust me, I could go on for hours of stories about Jehovah's Witnesses' love for alcohol. They love to drink. There are many alcoholics among Jehovah's Witnesses. Many of them drink daily, and even more get drunk whenever they may feel like it. Most of them blow off stress drinking. The second marijuana becomes okay, they'll be doing that too. But alcohol, for some odd reason, despite it being in black and white print and openly discussed in the New Testament as a sin, it escapes everyone's notice until someone's offended. It doesn't escape their notice. That's not even accurate. They just ignore it. The Bible condemns drunkenness. God hates over drinking. He hates it. Consider just one of the 75 verses the Bible contains condemning getting drunk. Galatians 5:19 through 21, New World Translation, quote, "Now the works of the flesh are plainly seen, and they are sexual immorality, uncleanness, brazen conduct, idolatry, spiritism, hostility, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, dissensions, divisions, sex, envy, drunkenness, wild parties, and things like these. I am forewarning you about these things, the same way I already forewarned you, that those who practice such things will not inherit God's kingdom." One of 75 mentions of how serious overdrinking is, and witnesses do it constantly in the West. I can't speak as much for other parts of the world. I'm guessing it's similar. Okay, now let's compare that to the Bible's warnings on birthdays. Here we go. Nothing. Zero. I don't think the pause was dramatic enough. Not one verse. Nothing. And what's really interesting on this subject of birthdays and the Christianity a la carte is that the Bible outright commands people. It's a command to not judge others who choose to observe special days. If you're looking where to find this in the Bible, it's in a book the governing body has never done a publication on, never done a book on, rarely does a Watchtower study on. I couldn't find any. Doesn't discuss at Kingdom Ministry School. Isn't that interesting? If you're looking for where it commands people to not judging others who have special observed days, it's Romans 14, 1 through 8. It's a direct comment from the Apostle Paul to not be overly concerned whether others observe special days or take part in special practices. Nonetheless, Jehovah's Witnesses will look for an opportunity to bust somebody at a birthday party. They've even got the kids tattling on other witness kids if they had a piece of cake at school. I think that birthdays and at the outset, gluttony and overeating are two of those subjects that have always stuck with me and just blown my mind at how they have hammered people's brains into mush in this religion. It's hypocrisy personified. It is the very definition, two stunning examples of the Bible blatantly saying or not saying something, and they have made up entire doctrines to the point where you can be disciplined for it. And they have the nerve to say not to go beyond the things that are written. But just as we close, on my two examples, it's all we have time for, of Christianity a la carte this week, might I remind everyone, how again does God view a hypocrite? Titus 1:16, quote, "They publicly declare that they know God, but they disown him by their works, because they are detestable and disobedient and not approved for every good work of any sort." So, despite what they say, despite the guilt trips, despite their crazy man-made personal opinions and beliefs that have carried on for decades, they're just hypocrites. They're just hypocrites. And it was all those years ago as a kid in the 80s, a teenager, that I coined that phrase, Christianity a la carte. They pick and they choose what they bless and condemn. Doesn't have any input from God or Jesus or the Bible. Bible simply doesn't comment on so many matters that Jehovah's Witnesses hammer people for. Jesus simply encouraged people, whether you believe in Jesus or not, by reading the text, the Gospels, you'll see that Jesus simply encouraged people to use their conscience. And it's painfully, painfully obvious that the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses want to take that away. They want to take that away. So I'll stop there for this week, folks. I appreciate you listening. It was kind of a rambling episode on these two subjects. I had a third teed up, but I think I'm going to save that for another day and come back with that, because I think it's a subject. It's another one of my Christianity a la cartes. Maybe that's a series I'm going to stumble and fall into on this podcast. I've gone well past the time I designed to talk tonight. I want to thank you for listening. Liking and subscribing on YouTube is very much appreciated, as is following on all the major podcast networks. We're refining this thing, but we're also trying to keep it honest, raw, and organic. And I just want to say thank you. I'd love to hear from you. What are your thoughts on gluttony? What are your thoughts on birthday parties? I'd love to hear your experiences. They bring me lots of smiles. There's times that bring me tears on some subjects, but these are two that I think it's okay to be a little sarcastic and have some fun with it. Thanks again for listening. I think that this has been one heck of a journey, taking a peek into the crazy, crazy world of Jehovah's Witnesses. So thanks again for joining me this week on Surviving Paradise. Be well, and I will see you again next week.